My name is Acacia Smith. I am 32 years old, and last Sunday evening, my parents stood in my living room and demanded I write a check for $50,000 to my younger brother. They told me Tyler needed a fresh start. They said family helps family, and that my green logistics company had more than enough revenue to support my own flesh and blood. What they did not know was that I had already fired Tyler that morning. They did not know the $50,000 they were demanding was the exact amount he had spent the last 6 months embezzling from my corporate accounts. When I looked at my father and saw the smug expectation on his face, I realized every boundary I ever set meant nothing to them. I made a choice right then to let them dig their own graves. How I trapped my brother and the piece of paper that finally shattered my parents' delusions is the story I am about to tell you. Before I do, welcome to Morning Revenge. Take a moment to like and subscribe if you think family loyalty has limits. Drop your age in the comments because I want to know who is listening. Now, let me take you back to the rain pounding against the glass of my Portland loft the night this war began. Gary and Susan sat on my reclaimed teak sofa. My father leaned forward with his hands clasped, wearing the damp fleece jacket he always wore when he wanted to look like a humble local. My mother sat rigid next to him, clutching a mug of tea she had not taken a single sip from. I stood near the window, keeping the length of the coffee table between us. "It is a bridge loan, Acacia," my father said. His voice had that practiced, patient tone he used whenever he thought I was being difficult. "Tyler has a lead on a new startup. He just needs the capital by Tuesday. You have the liquidity. We would do it ourselves, but our funds are tied up in the house remodel." My mother leaned in, softening her voice into a pitch of deep concern. "We take care of our own, sweetheart. You talk in those magazine interviews about community support and ethical business. How can you champion social responsibility out there but shut the door on your own brother?" I stared at her. The hypocrisy stung tight and sharp in my chest. They spent their lives in affluent neighborhoods preaching an earthy, cooperative lifestyle, yet they shielded their son from every consequence he ever faced. Tyler was 29 years old. His only talent was dodging accountability. $50,000, I said. I kept my voice flat, letting the number hang in the room. "It is an investment in his future," my father pressed. He mistook my calm demeanor for compliance. "You owe it to him to help." I looked past them at the city lights blurring in the rain. 50,000 was such a clean, round number. It was also a lie. Tyler did not need $50,000 to buy into a startup. He needed exactly $50,240 to replace the funds he had diverted from my company into a dummy shell corporation. He had dispatched our parents to extract the exact amount he needed to cover his tracks before my Monday morning audit. They sat in my home, demanding I finance the theft that nearly compromised my life work. They weaponized my own corporate ethics against me. They had no idea about the forged routing numbers. They had no idea I had already handed Tyler a termination packet and locked him out of the servers. The urge to throw the truth in their faces burned in my throat. I wanted to scream, but impulse is a liability. Portland business demands cold metrics and undeniable proof. I would not win a shouting match against their golden child syndrome. "I will review the financials," I told them, watching my father drop his shoulders in premature relief. "Let us sit down this week and look at his paperwork." I watched them leave 10 minutes later. As the heavy oak door clicked shut, I walked to my kitchen island and tapped my laptop screen. The document waiting on my desktop was not a loan agreement. It was an official Portland Police Bureau commercial crimes report bearing my brother's name. To understand how a family fractures with such precision, you have to look past the breaking point and examine the hairline cracks that had been spreading for years. The glow of the laptop screen cast a harsh blue light across my kitchen counter. I stared at the name typed under the suspect field, Tyler James Smith. Seeing my own brother categorized as a felony suspect did not bring a rush of tears. It brought a strange, cold clarity. The fracture in our family did not happen today. It had been eroding the foundation for a decade, carved out by 1,000 small choices my parents made to shield a boy who refused to become a man. My path to the executive suite was paved with concrete and caffeine. While my peers spent their early 20s networking at rooftop mixers, I worked graveyard shifts at a regional distribution center. I sorted freight manifests until my eyes burned, breathing in the scent of diesel exhaust and damp cardboard. Every paycheck went toward my supply chain management degree. I ate instant noodles over textbooks and took out loans that kept me awake at night. Tyler experienced a very different reality. 2 years behind me, he floated through life on a cushion of parental subsidies. When he totaled his first car by running a red light, my father bought him a newer model the following week, claiming the boy needed reliable transportation for his unpaid internship. When Tyler dropped out of college because the professors were too demanding, my mother paid his rent for 3 years so he could find his passion. They cultivated his entitlement like a prized garden, watering it with excuses and shielding it from the harsh climate of consequence. The only person who recognized the toxicity of this dynamic was my Aunt Denise. She was my mother's half-sister, a brilliant African-American woman who dominated the commercial real estate market. Denise navigated cutthroat boardroom negotiations with flawless composure. She wore sharp, tailored suits and spoke with a blunt honesty that often made my parents squirm. During my darkest college semesters, when the exhaustion felt terminal, Denise would take me to a quiet diner near the campus. She would order black coffee, look me dead in the eye, and validate every ounce of my frustration. "You are building an empire," she told me once, tapping a manicured fingernail against the diner table. "They are building a dependent. Do not let their guilt drag you down. You keep climbing." I held on to those words. I built EcoFreight Solutions from a rented garage into a firm that managed green logistics for the largest sustainable agriculture networks in the Pacific Northwest. I established strict ethical codes, rigorous compliance protocols, and a zero-tolerance policy for fraud. I guarded my professional boundaries like a fortress. But a fortress always falls from the inside. The breach happened exactly 1 year ago. It was a Sunday evening, much like this one. My parents had invited me to their Lake Oswego home for dinner. The house smelled of roasted rosemary chicken and expensive Pinot Noir. The dining room table was set with heavy silver cutlery and crisp linen napkins. It felt like a celebration, but I quickly realized it was an ambush. Tyler sat across from me picking at his food, his eyes glued to a sports betting app on his phone. He did not look up when my father cleared his throat and poured me a second glass of wine. "Acacia," my father started using his deepest, most authoritative voice. "Your mother and I are incredibly proud of your little company. It is growing so fast." "It is not a little company, Dad," I corrected softly. "We just cleared 8 figures in annual revenue." My mother reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. Her rings dug into my knuckles. "That is exactly why we need to talk. Tyler is struggling to find his footing. The job market is terrible right now, and he needs a structured environment. He needs direction." I pulled my hand back, feeling a sudden chill. "What are you asking?" "We want you to bring him on," my father said. "Give him a title. Logistics coordinator, maybe? An account manager? Just something to get his resume going. Family helps family, Acacia. It is the right thing to do." I looked at Tyler. He finally glanced up from his screen, offering a lazy, entitled shrug. "Yeah, sis, I could probably help you streamline some things." The sheer audacity of the request made my stomach twist. EcoFreight was not a charity. My hiring process involved 3 rounds of technical interviews, rigorous background checks, and a mandatory alignment with our environmental sustainability goals. Tyler had never tracked a single shipment in his life. He left his bedroom lights on all day and threw recyclable plastics into the trash just to spite the city ordinances. He was the antithesis of everything my company stood for. "He is not qualified," I said, keeping my voice level. My teams rely on precision. One missed routing code can cost a client thousands of dollars in spoiled organic goods. I cannot bypass my human resources protocols. The atmosphere in the dining room snapped. My mother narrowed her eyes, the warm maternal facade dropping instantly. Do not hide behind corporate jargon, Acacia. We paid for your braces. We put a roof over your head. We supported you so you could have this success. They did not mention the loans I paid off myself or the graveyard shifts, but they wielded their basic parental obligations like a weapon. My father leaned in his tone, turning sharp. If you refuse to help your own brother when you have the power to change his life, what does that say about your character? You talk about community, but you act like a ruthless corporate suit. Show some grace. The argument dragged on for 2 hours. They wore me down with a relentless barrage of guilt, leveraging every childhood memory and perceived debt. The pressure became a physical weight pressing on my chest. I knew giving in would be a catastrophic error. I knew the boundaries I spent 10 years building were meant to keep people like Tyler out of my professional sphere. But the programming of a lifetime is difficult to rewrite in a single evening. The need to prove I was not a ruthless, heartless daughter overrode my executive instincts. I wanted them to look at me the way they looked at him, with that unconditional protective warmth. Fine, I whispered, staring at my half-empty wine glass. He starts as a junior coordinator, a 90-day probationary period. He reports to a floor supervisor, not to me. My parents beamed, their victory secured. Tyler offered a smug smile, raising his water glass in a mock toast. Thanks, boss. I drove home that night with a bitter taste in my mouth, gripping the steering wheel until my fingers ached. I had compromised my own integrity. I allowed blood to bypass the very rules that kept my business alive. I opened the door to the vault and handed the key to a thief. That decision haunted every step I took over the next 12 months. The friction began the very second Tyler walked through the glass doors of Eco Freight Solutions, and it did not take long for his laziness to mutate into active destruction. Tyler walked into the Eco Freight Solutions headquarters on his first Monday, 45 minutes late. He carried a branded disposable coffee cup with a non-recyclable plastic lid, leaving a trail of water droplets across our polished concrete floors. The Portland office operated as a living organism. We featured open floor plans, walls lined with living moss, and an atmosphere built on radical transparency. Every employee understood the mission. We provided green logistics, routing freight through eco-conscious corridors to minimize carbon footprints. The culture demanded relentless accountability. Tyler treated the environment like a temporary waiting room. He expected his bloodline to function as an all-access pass. During his orientation, instead of learning our routing software, he spent the hour telling the human resources manager about his connection to the founder. He thought the title of junior coordinator was a formality, a placeholder until I promoted him to an executive suite. The friction started on day 2 and escalated with a steady, predictable rhythm. I witnessed the first infraction during our weekly compliance briefing. We sat in the main conference room while my lead operations manager detailed the new federal emissions standards. The topic required intense focus. I looked across the glass table and saw Tyler staring at his lap. The faint, repetitive electronic chiming of a mobile game echoed in the quiet room. He had not even muted his device. When I caught his eye attempting to send a silent, stern warning, he merely offered a lazy smirk and tipped an imaginary hat to me. I had to grip my pen until my knuckles turned white to keep from halting the meeting. His incompetence quickly bled into our client relations. Eco Freight built its reputation on treating vendors as partners, prioritizing sustainable farming cooperatives that relied on our ethical transport methods. Tyler handled these relationships with staggering arrogance. In his 3rd week, a prominent local vendor called to inquire about a delayed shipment of organic fertilizers. Tyler took the call in the bullpen. Instead of investigating the delay, he leaned back in his ergonomic chair, put his feet on the desk, and told the vendor they needed to stop acting like panicky dirt farmers. The vendor immediately threatened to pull their entire account. I spent 4 hours that evening engaged in delicate damage control. I drove to the vendor location, sat down with their operations team, and offered a significant reduction in our transport fees to salvage the contract. I absorbed the financial hit without saying a word to my parents. My mother called me almost every other night, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, asking how her boy was thriving in the corporate world. She spun fantasies about Tyler discovering his true potential. I stood in my kitchen rubbing my temples and offered vague assurances. I told her he was learning the ropes. I swallowed the reality to maintain the fragile peace in our family, acting as a buffer between his reckless entitlement and the stringent demands of my company. The emotional toll began to manifest physically. I stopped sleeping through the night. My jaw ached from clenching my teeth. I realized I was spending 30% of my work week auditing his logs, quietly fixing his coding errors before they hit the main servers, and playing the role of his invisible safety net. Aunt Denise saw the fatigue before anyone else did. She called me on a Tuesday morning and demanded we meet for coffee at a small independent roastery near my office. The cafe smelled of roasted beans and damp cedar. Denise sat in a corner booth wearing a sharp navy suit that commanded immediate respect. She did not bother with pleasantries. She slid a cup of black coffee across the table and studied my face. "You look like you are carrying a building on your shoulders," Denise said, her voice low and direct. "Tell me about the boy." I tried to deflect, offering a weak smile. "He is adjusting. It is a steep learning curve." Denise took a slow sip from her cup, never breaking eye contact. "Do not lie to me, Acacia. Your parents spent 3 decades treating that boy like fragile glass. They taught him that rules apply to everyone else. You brought a parasite into your ecosystem, hoping the environment would change him. But a parasite does not stop feeding until the host is dead." The truth of her words hit me like a physical blow. She understood the precise nature of the threat. She knew my desire to prove my loyalty to my parents was destroying the empire I had built. "You need to cut the cord," she warned, setting her cup down with a definitive click, "before he drags you under." I left the coffee shop feeling a cold sense of dread, but I still hesitated. I wanted to believe I could manage him. That illusion shattered 48 hours later. Tyler committed an error that transcended mere laziness. It was a Thursday afternoon, the busiest routing day of the week. Cascade Organic Cooperatives, our most prestigious sustainable farming client, entrusted us with transporting an exceptional yield of highly perishable heirloom crops. The contract stipulated strict temperature controls and a precise delivery window to prevent spoilage. Tyler was responsible for inputting the final digital manifest. Instead of verifying the refrigeration metrics, he hurried through the coding to leave early for a weekend trip. He entered the wrong environmental parameters and routed the transport trucks to a secondary hub 300 miles in the opposite direction. My lead dispatcher caught the anomaly just as the trucks crossed the state line. If those crops spoiled, the financial penalty would cripple EcoFreight for the quarter. Worse, the reputational damage in the eco-conscious sector would be irreversible. I went into triage mode. I spent 6 agonizing hours on the phone, leveraging every favor I had in the industry to intercept the drivers, secure emergency cold storage, and reroute the entire fleet. We saved the shipment by a margin of less than an hour, but the emergency logistics fees ate our entire profit margin for the month. When Tyler strolled into the office late on Friday morning, looking rested and unbothered, the last remnants of my sisterly patience evaporated. The CEO took over. I summoned him to my office. I did not invite him to sit. I stood behind my desk, the glass surface clear except for a single printed document. Tyler walked in with a casual strut, expecting another gentle reprimand. "Rough night, boss?" he asked, flashing that familiar entitled grin. I picked up the document and slid it across the glass. It was a formal, written warning drafted by my Human Resources Department, detailing the exact financial cost of his negligence. "Sign it," I said. My voice held no emotion, no warmth, no trace of the sister who had covered for him. Tyler looked at the paper, his smile faltering. "What is this?" "Come on, Acacia. It was just a tiny clerical mistake. You fixed it. Do not be so dramatic."
"You jeopardized our largest account," I replied, keeping my gaze locked on his. "You cost this firm thousands of dollars because you wanted to start your weekend early. This is your final written warning. You are no longer on a probationary period. You are on notice. One more missed deadline, one more routing error, one more complaint from a vendor, and you are terminated." Tyler stared at me, processing the shift in my demeanor. The realization that I was no longer playing the role of his protector hit him. His posture stiffened, the lazy entitlement in his eyes hardened into something sharp and resentful. He grabbed a pen, scrawled his name on the line with heavy force, and threw the pen onto my desk. "You are going to regret treating family like just another employee," he sneered. He turned and walked out of the office, letting the door slam shut behind him. I thought I had finally established control. I thought the written warning would force him to fall in line. I underestimated the depth of his resentment. Stripped of his ability to coast, Tyler did not decide to work harder. He realized he needed a new way to exploit the system, pushing him to take a calculated, desperate action that would alter the course of our lives. 3 weeks passed since I slid that final written warning across my desk. The rain had stopped, leaving the city locked in a crisp, dry freeze. It was late on a Tuesday night. The Eco Freight headquarters sat empty. The living moss walls cast a faint green shadow under the emergency security lighting. I sat alone in my corner office, staring at a dual-monitor setup. It was the end of our fiscal quarter, the specific time I dedicate to a manual review of our carbon offset routing logs. We pride ourselves on radical transparency. Every dollar we spend to balance our environmental footprint is meticulously tracked and reported to our eco-conscious investors. I poured a cup of cold brew coffee and opened the master spreadsheet. The numbers usually tell a simple story of progress and sustainability. Tonight, they told a different tale. While cross-referencing our disbursements to a trusted regional biodiesel supplier, I noticed a subtle discrepancy. The invoice formatting matched our standard templates perfectly. The amounts looked routine, blending in with our usual operational expenses. However, the banking transit codes listed on the final payout column did not belong to the verified supplier. I zoomed in on the screen, my heart beating a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. The funds designated for our primary biodiesel partner were being quietly diverted into a secondary, unverified account. The theft started small: $3,000 in October, $5,000 in November. Then the amounts doubled over the winter holidays. My chest tightened, drawing in a sharp breath of the cool, conditioned air. In the logistics industry, diverted funds are the first symptom of a terminal disease. If a firm loses control of its vendor payments, the entire ethical structure collapses. I picked up my phone and sent a single text message to Elias, my internal compliance officer. Elias arrived 20 minutes later, wearing a heavy wool coat over his pajamas. He was a former federal bank examiner who joined my team because he genuinely believed in our green mission. He possessed a clinical mind that saw structural patterns where others saw chaos. I respected him deeply because he operated strictly on logic untouched by office politics or familial obligations. I locked the frosted glass door to my office, pulled the blinds shut, and pointed to the glowing screen. We needed to keep the circle incredibly small. If rumors of a financial breach leaked to our sustainable farming clients, panic would empty our accounts faster than any thief ever could. Elias took the seat next to me. We spent the next 3 hours dissecting the accounting software. We moved in silence, the only sound the rapid clicking of his keyboard.
He bypassed the standard user interface, diving deep into the foundational code of our routing program. The diverted payments were cleverly disguised using layered authorization protocols. Whoever initiated the transfers used administrative override codes to mask the destination account. They created ghost shipments. These were dummy freight runs logged into the system as requiring urgent carbon offsets. Once the automated system approved the environmental tax, the thief simply funneled the cash out the back door.
"We have a parasite," Elias muttered, rubbing his tired eyes under his thick glasses. "The secondary account belongs to an independent limited liability company registered just 2 months ago. Find the name," I instructed, my voice barely above a whisper. Elias accessed the state business registry. He typed in the routing metrics and hit search. A digital document rendered on the right monitor. The dummy corporation was listed as Green Horizon Enterprises. I scanned the page, searching for the registered agent. My eyes landed on the physical address, 402 Northwest Flanders Street, apartment 3B. The address struck me like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. It was a luxury loft in the Pearl District. I recognized the unit number instantly. I remembered the exact day my parents signed the lease as guarantors because the tenant had no verifiable income. It was Tyler. The betrayal washed over me, cold and precise, freezing the blood in my veins. Tyler did not just make a clerical error to leave work early. He had spent the last several months exploiting my trust, manipulating our corporate software to steal from the very firm I built from nothing. He weaponized our ethical mission, using our carbon offset program as a smokescreen for embezzlement. In the Pacific Northwest, your environmental integrity is your primary currency. If our clients discovered we were funneling green offset funds into a private shell company, they would sever their contracts immediately. The media would run stories about eco-fraud. My 60 employees would lose their jobs. Tyler was holding a match to the livelihoods of every person in that building. I thought about my mother, calling me every other night, praising her son for finally finding his path in the corporate world. She had pushed so hard to get him this job. She claimed he just needed structure. I realized then that she did not want him to learn responsibility. She wanted me to subsidize his lifestyle so she could stop paying for it. Tyler, emboldened by a lifetime of zero consequences, decided a paycheck was not enough. He wanted the treasury. Elias turned his chair to face me. He saw the recognition dawn in my eyes. He knew Tyler was the only employee with both the administrative access to override those invoices and the reckless arrogance to try it. "Do you want me to call the authorities right now?" Elias asked, reaching for his phone on the desk. "We can have the police waiting for him when the sun comes up." I stared at the forged documents on the screen. A profound psychological shift occurred inside my mind. The sister who compromised her boundaries to please her parents died in that quiet office. The chief executive took full control. If I called the police tonight, Tyler would spin a web of lies. He would claim it was a misunderstanding, a software glitch, or a mistaken entry. My parents would hire high-priced defense attorneys. They would drag EcoFreight through a public scandal, painting me as a vindictive sibling trying to ruin her innocent brother. I could not afford a messy, emotional battle. Portland corporate culture demanded absolute accountability, and I intended to deliver it flawlessly. "No," I told Elias, my voice steady and hard as polished steel. "Do not make the call. Not yet." Elias frowned, his compliance instincts flaring. "Acacia, every day we let this continue, the firm bleeds capital. He is a massive liability." "He is a criminal," I corrected him. "But right now, we only have the destination of the funds. I need the digital footprints. I need the specific internet protocol addresses matching his corporate laptop. I want the time-stamped security footage showing him at his desk when these ghost shipments were authorized.
I want an airtight case that no lawyer can dismantle and no parent can excuse. We outlined a silent strategy. Elias would install a monitoring script on the main server. The software would capture every keystroke Tyler made. We would let him think he was winning. We would let him feel smart, arrogant, and untouchable. For the next 14 days, I would walk past his desk, smile, and ask him about his weekend plans. I would sit across from my parents and listen to their endless praise of his fake accomplishments. I would absorb the sickening reality of his betrayal while quietly archiving the evidence that would ensure his ruin. As dawn broke over the skyline, casting a pale gray light into my office, I felt a dangerous calm settle over me. Tyler wanted to play a high-stakes corporate game. He assumed I was too soft, too bound by family guilt to notice his theft. He was about to learn a devastating lesson about the true cost of doing business. But before the trap could snap shut, I had to survive 2 weeks of the most agonizing psychological endurance test of my life, a silent audit where one wrong look could tip him off and destroy my entire strategy. Over the next 14 days, I mastered the terrifying art of the hollow smile. Walking past Tyler at his desk required a physical suppression of every executive instinct I possessed. He sat in the center of the bullpen, occupying a designer ergonomic chair our mother had purchased for him, sipping iced matcha and projecting the aura of a vital department head. I would stop and inquire about his current routing sheets and offer brief words of encouragement. Behind the polite exchange, my mind processed the live feed from the monitoring software. We watched him deploy authorized credentials to siphon capital into his shell account. The dissonance between his relaxed posture and the digital theft occurring under his fingertips felt surreal. The strain of the silent audit began to manifest in my body. My shoulders knotted into tight bands of tension. I drank too much black coffee and ate protein bars instead of real meals. I watched Tyler strut through the break room, boasting to a seasoned logistics manager about a new luxury watch he planned to buy. The arrogance rolled off him in palpable waves. He believed he was outsmarting an entire ecosystem of trained professionals. Elias operated like a phantom within our network architecture. He bypassed the main firewall to install keystroke loggers directly onto the junior coordinator terminal. The data stream provided undeniable clarity. We captured the precise internet protocol addresses, linking the ghost shipments to the wireless router at his Pearl District apartment. We recorded the time-stamped screen captures, showing the cursor hovering over the override command. The most damning evidence involved my own digital identity. The software captured Tyler using a duplicated vector graphic of my administrative signature, manually appending it to fraudulent invoices. He thought he was covering his tracks, but he was actually weaving his own snare. The true test of my psychological endurance arrived on the second Sunday of the investigation. Gary and Susan hosted a dinner to celebrate their recent kitchen remodel. The air inside their Lake Oswego home smelled of fresh paint and roasted lamb. I sat at the pristine marble island, holding a glass of sparkling water trapped in a suffocating bubble of familial delusion. Tyler dominated the conversation from the moment the appetizers were served. He spun elaborate tales about optimizing the regional supply chain and navigating complex vendor negotiations, stealing credit for the grueling labor performed by my senior dispatchers. My father beamed with radiant pride, swirling a glass of expensive bourbon. "Look at him," Gary announced, clapping a heavy hand on the shoulder of his son. "I told you the boy just needed the right environment to flourish. He is practically running the logistics division now." Susan smiled delicately, slicing into the roast. "We always knew he possessed a brilliant business mind. He just required someone to believe in his potential. Thank you for giving him the platform to shine, Acacia." I looked at the two of them. They wore their ignorance like a badge of honor, blind to the monster they had cultivated. I wanted to reach across the counter and shatter the crystal glasses against the custom tile backsplash. I wanted to scream that their brilliant boy was currently draining my operating capital to fund his leisure activities. I wanted to expose the rot hiding beneath his charming anecdotes. Instead, I took a slow, calculated sip of my water. I forced the corners of my mouth to rise into a warm, convincing curve. I told them he was certainly making an unforgettable impact on the firm. The isolation in that kitchen felt heavier than any cargo container my fleet ever transported. I was surrounded by my own blood relatives, yet I had never stood on a more lonely island. They did not love the daughter who built an empire. They only loved the daughter who subsidized their parenting failures. By Wednesday of the second week, the trap contained all necessary components. Elias and I sat in my office long after the cleaning crews finished their rounds. We reviewed the final ledger under the harsh glow of the overhead fluorescent lights. The spreadsheet isolated every diverted payment, every forged invoice, and every unauthorized carbon offset transfer. The columns aligned in perfect, devastating order. Elias hit the summation key. The screen rendered the final metric: $50,240. It was a staggering figure for a junior employee to steal within such a short time frame. He did not just skim a few $100s to cover rent. He systematically bled the accounts, growing bolder and more reckless with every successful transaction. The sheer magnitude of his greed sickened me. I instructed Elias to initiate a shadow lock on the corporate servers. We established a secondary network infrastructure. At exactly 8 o'clock on Friday morning, every access badge, login credential, and email account associated with Tyler James Smith would instantly terminate. The thief would find himself locked inside a digital fortress he could no longer manipulate. Thursday afternoon required a discreet exit from the Eco-Freight building. I placed the printed dossiers bound in stark white folders into a secure leather briefcase. I drove through the gray Portland drizzle to the central precinct of the police bureau. The Commercial Crimes Division operated out of a sterile, brightly lit suite on the third floor. The hallway smelled of stale coffee and floor wax. Detective Ramirez, a seasoned investigator with sharp eyes and a cynical demeanor, reviewed the files. He did not ask emotional questions. He processed the tracking logs, the shell company registration, and the forged signature stamps with clinical efficiency. The silence in his cubicle stretched for 10 minutes as he flipped through the pristine evidence. "This is remarkably thorough," the detective noted, closing the thick folder and leaning back in his chair. "Most corporate fraud victims bring us vague suspicions or messy accounting errors. You brought us a completed prosecution wrapped in a bow." "I need a formal case number," I told him, keeping my posture rigid. "I require the official documentation in my possession before the sun comes up tomorrow." He typed a series of commands into his terminal. The printer hummed to life in the corner of the room. He retrieved the official complaint, stamped the heavy seal of the bureau on the top page, and handed the document across the metal desk. The gears of the justice system were officially engaged. The state of Oregon now recognized my brother as a felony suspect. There was no retreating from this threshold. I returned to my loft just as the city lights began to reflect against the wet pavement below my windows. The space felt quiet and vast, devoid of the toxic noise that usually accompanied my family. I laid the termination packet on the surface of the kitchen island. Beside it, I placed the official police report. I ran my fingertips over the embossed seal, feeling the ridges of the ink. The paper felt heavy, loaded with the kinetic energy of an impending explosion. I had spent 2 weeks absorbing the friction playing the fool and letting the parasite think he was consuming the host. Tomorrow morning, the sociopathic smile would disappear. Tomorrow morning, the compliant sister would vanish forever. I poured a glass of red wine, walked to the window, and stared out into the dark skyline. The silent audit was complete. The execution awaited. Friday morning broke with a pale, unforgiving light filtering through the Portland cloud cover. I arrived at the Eco-Freight headquarters 2 hours before the standard opening time. The polished concrete floors gleamed under the ambient green hue of the living moss walls. The air smelled of ozone and organic floor cleaner. I walked into my corner office and closed the frosted glass door. I placed the termination packet in the exact center of my desk. Beside it sat the printed network tracking data, a stark physical record of digital theft. At precisely 8 o'clock, Elias executed the shadow lock. I watched the system monitor on my secondary screen blink green, confirming that every credential assigned to the junior logistics coordinator no longer existed in our architecture. The bullpen began to fill with the low hum of morning productivity. Keyboards clicked, espresso machines hissed, and dispatchers negotiated routing paths with fleet drivers. Tyler strolled through the double glass doors at 8:20. He carried his usual disposable coffee cup, radiating an unearned confidence. I watched him through the blinds as he tossed his jacket onto a chair and tapped his keyboard to wake his terminal. A small wrinkle formed between his brows when the screen denied him entry. He tapped the keys again, harder this time, expecting the machine to bend to his will. I lifted my desk phone and dialed the administrative assistant stationed near the bullpen. I instructed her to send my brother into my office. Tyler pushed my door open without knocking, bringing the scent of cheap cologne and roasted sugar into the room. He sank into one of the leather visitor chairs and let out a dramatic sigh. "My computer is frozen," he announced, leaning back and crossing his ankles. "The technology department needs to fix the network. I cannot access any of the vendor routing files." I remained standing behind my desk, resting my palms flat against the cool glass surface. "The technology department did not freeze your terminal," I replied, keeping my voice stripped of any warmth. "I revoked your access." His posture shifted, the relaxed lean turning into a stiff, wary, upright position. He offered a confused, mocking laugh. "What are you talking about, Acacia? Did I miss a compliance training video or something? Do not play boss with me today. I have a headache." I did not waste oxygen on a reprimand. I picked up the stack of printed Internet protocol logs and slid them across the smooth desk. They stopped inches from his hands. "I suggest you read the top page," I instructed. Tyler glanced at the paper. His eyes tracked the highlighted lines of code. The mocking smile slowly peeled away from his face, replaced by a rigid, terrifying stillness. The document listed the dummy corporation name, his apartment address, and the precise times he authorized the ghost shipments. The silence in the office grew heavy, pressing against the glass walls. A thin layer of sweat broke out along his hairline. He swallowed hard, his throat working against a sudden dryness. "This is a misunderstanding," he stammered, his voice lacking the usual arrogant bass. "The routing software must have a glitch. Someone hacked the vendor portal. You know I would never do something like this to you." I watched him scramble for a lifeline, constructing a pathetic defense. "You used a duplicated vector graphic of my administrative signature," I stated, maintaining a steady clinical rhythm. "You routed $50,240 into a limited liability company registered to your residential address. The network logged your keystrokes for the past 14 days. We watched you execute the transfers in real time." He looked up, his eyes darting around the room, as if searching for an escape hatch. The reality of the trap closed in on him. When the technical defense collapsed, he deployed his oldest weapon. He played the family card. "Acacia, please," he begged, his tone shifting into a desperate, practiced whine. "You cannot do this. We are blood. I am your brother." I got in over my head with some bad investments. I needed the capital to stay afloat. Mom and Dad would be crushed if they knew about this. "You know how much stress Dad has been under with the remodel. We can keep this between us. I will pay you back every cent. Just give me a little time." His plea relied on the same emotional manipulation our parents used to force him into my company a year ago. He expected the dutiful daughter to surface, to shield him from the consequences of his actions, to protect the family peace. I looked at the man sitting across from me, realizing I felt nothing but a profound, chilling indifference. "Eco Freight is not a piggy bank for your bad investments," I replied. "You jeopardized the ethical standing of this entire firm. You risked the livelihoods of 60 employees who work hard to pay their own bills. You are not a brother asking for help. You are a thief caught in the act." I picked up the second document and slid it over the glass. Your employment is terminated, effective immediately. Sign the acknowledgement. The realization that his manipulation failed struck him like a physical blow. The panic in his eyes hardened, crystallizing into a dark, venomous hatred. The spoiled golden child vanished, revealing the vindictive core underneath. Tyler pushed the termination papers back toward me, refusing to touch the pen. He stood up, towering over the desk, planting his knuckles on the glass. "You think you are so untouchable in your little glass tower," he hissed, his face flushing a deep, mottled red. "You think you can just throw me out. Wait until I tell Mom and Dad how you treated me. They know how jealous you have always been. I will tell them you fired me because I uncovered your own shady accounting. I will tell the entire family you are a ruthless, greedy hypocrite. You will not have a single relative left willing to speak your name." I did not flinch. I reached under the rim of my desk and pressed the silent security button. "I prefer a quiet exit," I told him, matching his dark stare with unblinking resolve. "But if you want to leave shouting, the choice is yours." The frosted glass door opened behind him. 2 uniformed security guards stepped into the office. The sudden presence of physical enforcement drained the bravado from his posture. Tyler looked at the guards, then back to me, his chest heaving with shallow, rapid breaths. "Hand over your key card," I ordered. He reached into his pocket with trembling fingers, pulling out the plastic badge. He tossed it onto the desk. It landed with a sharp clatter against the glass. "Escort him out of the building," I told the guards. "Do not let him stop at his desk. We will mail his personal effects to his residential address." The guards flanked him, placing their hands near his elbows. Tyler stiffened, jerking his arms away, but he had no choice but to walk. I stepped out of my office and stood near the doorway, watching the procession. The entire bullpen fell dead silent. 60 employees stopped typing, stopped speaking, and turned their heads to watch the junior logistics coordinator march toward the exit under security escort. The humiliation burned bright red on his neck. The open floor plan offered no hiding places, no shadows to conceal his disgrace. As they reached the double glass doors, Tyler stopped and turned his head over his shoulder. He locked eyes with me across the expanse of the quiet office. The hatred radiating from him was a tangible force, a toxic spill threatening to poison everything it touched. "You are going to regret this," he promised, his voice carrying through the silent room. "You are dead to this family." The glass doors shut behind him, cutting off his parting threat. The silence in the bullpen stretched for 10 heavy seconds before I turned back to my staff, instructing them to return to their morning tasks. The immediate threat was neutralized, but a dark, creeping realization settled in my stomach. Tyler was backed into a corner, desperate to cover up the missing funds. He was not just going to leave quietly. He was heading straight to our parents, carrying a fabricated story designed to turn my own blood into a weapon against me. The gap between Friday morning and Sunday evening contained a masterclass in psychological manipulation. When the security guards escorted my brother out of the Eco-Freight lobby, his public humiliation rapidly morphed into profound terror. He possessed enough intelligence to understand the severity of the evidence I slid across the glass desk. The Internet Protocol logs the forged signature graphics, and the dummy corporation records formed an inescapable snare. He knew my silent audit left zero room for a technical defense. His only viable route to salvation required replacing the stolen capital before the financial institutions opened their doors on Monday. If the routing accounts balanced, he could hire a defense attorney to argue the missing funds resulted from an unauthorized internal transfer or a temporary coding glitch. He needed to inject reasonable doubt into the pending criminal charge, but achieving that required immediate liquidity. He needed $50,240 in hard cash. Tyler could not secure a legitimate bank loan. His credit history consisted of defaulted credit cards and unpaid utility bills. He had only one reliable source of funding, the same source that had subsidized every failure, excused every mistake, and shielded him from every consequence since childhood. He needed to extract the money from our parents. To accomplish this, he could not arrive at their Lake Oswego home as a defeated thief. He needed to walk through their front door as a victim of ruthless corporate betrayal. I stood in my kitchen on Sunday night, staring at the official police report resting on the island counter, piecing together the exact sequence of his deception. Based on the specific phrases my father used during their ambush, the architecture of Tyler's lie became vividly clear. He must have driven straight to the suburbs after leaving my building. He likely sat at their custom marble island, burying his face in his hands, delivering the performance of a lifetime. He spun a narrative designed to exploit their deepest insecurities and validate their golden child syndrome. Tyler told Gary and Susan that I fired him out of sheer, uncontrollable jealousy. He claimed his natural talent for logistics attracted the attention of a major competitor operating out of Seattle. According to his fabricated story, this phantom rival firm recognized his brilliant industry insights and offered him a senior executive role. He told our parents he brought in highly lucrative vendor leads, optimized the regional supply chains, and single-handedly saved the company thousands of dollars. The fiction painted him as a rising star in the eco-conscious transport sector. Then he introduced the villain. He told them I discovered the competing offer and flew into a vindictive rage. He claimed I felt deeply threatened by his rapid success. In his twisted version of reality, I terminated his employment to steal his client list and prevent him from eclipsing my own legacy. He painted me as a cold, calculating tyrant, willing to destroy her own flesh and blood to protect her fragile ego. The most infuriating aspect of this deception was not the lie itself. It was the eagerness with which my parents swallowed the bait. Gary and Susan spent decades treating my professional ambition as a character flaw. When I skipped holiday gatherings to study supply chain models, my mother called me obsessed. When I secured my first round of venture capital, my father warned me that an intense career would ruin my personal life. They preferred my brother because his constant failures kept him dependent, and dependent children never challenge parental authority. My wealth and autonomy made them deeply uncomfortable because it stripped them of their control over me. Tyler's lie perfectly restored their preferred worldview. In their minds, I remained the flawed, heartless corporate drone, while their son transformed into a misunderstood genius, victimized by my greed. The narrative absolved him of his laziness and justified their relentless favoritism. Once he hooked them emotionally, he deployed the financial trap. He explained that the prestigious Seattle firm offered him a lucrative partnership, but securing the position required an initial equity buy-in. He needed to demonstrate skin in the game. The cost of this phantom equity stake was exactly $50,000. He called it a bridge loan, assuring them the new venture would yield massive returns within a fiscal quarter. My parents wanted to write the check immediately. They wanted to fund his victory and prove his superiority. However, their recent lavish kitchen renovations tied up their liquid assets. They could not produce the cash before the fictional Tuesday deadline. Tyler feigned despair, playing the wounded victim watching his dreams slip away. He manipulated their parental guilt until Gary arrived at the exact conclusion my brother intended from the start. My father decided I should be the one to pay. Gary convinced himself that I owed Tyler this money as a penalty for stunting his career. He viewed the $50,000 not as a loan, but as a righteous wealth redistribution. They decided to confront me in my own home, demanding I finance the fresh start they believed I had maliciously sabotaged. The dramatic irony burned in my chest as I replayed their Sunday evening ambush. They sat on my teak sofa, weaponizing my own environmental ethics, demanding I support the community while accusing me of hoarding my resources. They lectured me about family loyalty, entirely blind to the fact that their precious son had spent the last 2 quarters bleeding my accounts dry. They thought they were rescuing an ambitious entrepreneur from a cruel sister. They had no idea they were acting as debt collectors for a desperate felon trying to evade a grand theft charge. The realization hardened my resolve into something sharp and unbreakable. For years, I absorbed their passive-aggressive comments. I tolerated the double standards to maintain a fragile illusion of harmony. I hired a toxic liability to keep the peace. But the events of the weekend crossed a threshold that could never be uncrossed. Tyler did not just steal my capital, he weaponized my extended family, turning my own parents into unwitting accomplices in his cover-up. I picked up my phone from the kitchen counter. The screen displayed 3 missed calls from my mother, likely eager to confirm I was reviewing the financial paperwork for her boy. I did not listen to the voicemails. I deleted them. The immediate confrontation with my parents had ended, but the war was expanding. Tyler realized his primary extraction method failed. I did not write the check. He remained $50,000 short, and the clock ticked relentlessly toward Monday morning. A cornered animal grows increasingly dangerous, and my brother was about to escalate his smear campaign beyond the walls of my loft, setting off a chain reaction that would force me to deploy the final, devastating phase of my strategy. The gap between Friday morning and Sunday evening contained a masterclass in psychological manipulation. When the security guards escorted my brother out of the Eco-Freight lobby, his public humiliation rapidly morphed into profound terror. He possessed enough intelligence to understand the severity of the evidence I slid across the glass desk. The Internet Protocol logs, the forged signature graphics, and the dummy corporation records formed an inescapable snare. He knew my silent audit left zero room for a technical defense. His only viable route to salvation required replacing the stolen capital before the financial institutions opened their doors on Monday. If the routing accounts balanced, he could hire a defense attorney to argue the missing funds resulted from an unauthorized internal transfer or a temporary coding glitch. He needed to inject reasonable doubt into the pending criminal charge. But achieving that required immediate liquidity. He needed $50,240 in hard cash. Tyler could not secure a legitimate bank loan. His credit history consisted of defaulted credit cards and unpaid utility bills. He had only one reliable source of funding, the same source that had subsidized every failure, excused every mistake, and shielded him from every consequence since childhood. He needed to extract the money from our parents. To accomplish this, he could not arrive at their Lake Oswego home as a defeated thief. He needed to walk through their front door as a victim of ruthless corporate betrayal. I stood in my kitchen on Sunday night, staring at the official police report resting on the island counter, piecing together the exact sequence of his deception. Based on the specific phrases my father used during their ambush, the architecture of Tyler's lie became vividly clear. He must have driven straight to the suburbs after leaving my building. He likely sat at their custom marble island, burying his face in his hands, delivering the performance of a lifetime. He spun a narrative designed to exploit their deepest insecurities and validate their golden child syndrome. Tyler told Gary and Susan that I fired him out of sheer uncontrollable jealousy. He claimed his natural talent for logistics attracted the attention of a major competitor operating out of Seattle. According to his fabricated story, this phantom rival firm recognized his brilliant industry insights and offered him a senior executive role. He told our parents he brought in highly lucrative vendor leads, optimized the regional supply chains, and single-handedly saved the company thousands of dollars. The fiction painted him as a rising star in the eco-conscious transport sector. Then he introduced the villain. He told them I discovered the competing offer and flew into a vindictive rage. He claimed I felt deeply threatened by his rapid success. In his twisted version of reality, I terminated his employment to steal his client list and prevent him from eclipsing my own legacy. He painted me as a cold, calculating tyrant, willing to destroy her own flesh and blood to protect her fragile ego. The most infuriating aspect of this deception was not the lie itself. It was the eagerness with which my parents swallowed the bait.
Gary and Susan spent decades treating my professional ambition as a character flaw. When I skipped holiday gatherings to study supply chain models, my mother called me obsessed. When I secured my first round of venture capital, my father warned me that an intense career would ruin my personal life. They preferred my brother because his constant failures kept him dependent, and dependent children never challenge parental authority. My wealth and autonomy made them deeply uncomfortable because it stripped them of their control over me. Tyler's lie perfectly restored their preferred worldview. In their minds, I remained the flawed, heartless corporate drone, while their son transformed into a misunderstood genius, victimized by my greed. The narrative absolved him of his laziness and justified their relentless favoritism. Once he hooked them emotionally, he deployed the financial trap. He explained that the prestigious Seattle firm offered him a lucrative partnership, but securing the position required an initial equity buy-in. He needed to demonstrate skin in the game. The cost of this phantom equity stake was exactly $50,000. He called it a bridge loan, assuring them the new venture would yield massive returns within a fiscal quarter. My parents wanted to write the check immediately. They wanted to fund his victory and prove his superiority. However, their recent lavish kitchen renovations tied up their liquid assets. They could not produce the cash before the fictional Tuesday deadline. Tyler feigned despair, playing the wounded victim watching his dreams slip away. He manipulated their parental guilt until Gary arrived at the exact conclusion my brother intended from the start. My father decided I should be the one to pay. Gary convinced himself that I owed Tyler this money as a penalty for stunting his career. He viewed the $50,000 not as a loan, but as a righteous wealth redistribution. They decided to confront me in my own home, demanding I finance the fresh start they believed I had maliciously sabotaged. The dramatic irony burned in my chest as I replayed their Sunday evening ambush. They sat on my teak sofa, weaponizing my own environmental ethics, demanding I support the community, while accusing me of hoarding my resources. They lectured me about family loyalty, entirely blind to the fact that their precious son had spent the last 2 quarters bleeding my accounts dry. They thought they were rescuing an ambitious entrepreneur from a cruel sister. They had no idea they were acting as debt collectors for a desperate felon trying to evade a grand theft charge. The realization hardened my resolve into something sharp and unbreakable. For years, I absorbed their passive-aggressive comments. I tolerated the double standards to maintain a fragile illusion of harmony. I hired a toxic liability to keep the peace. But the events of the weekend crossed a threshold that could never be uncrossed. Tyler did not just steal my capital. He weaponized my extended family, turning my own parents into unwitting accomplices in his cover-up. I told them I would review the financial paperwork, offering a hollow concession to end the intrusion. I expected them to take the subtle dismissal, gather their coats, and retreat to the suburbs. But my father did not stand up. Gary settled deeper into the teak sofa, his jaw setting into a rigid, defiant line. He recognized the corporate deflection. He had spent years watching me negotiate with difficult vendors, and he knew a stall tactic when he heard one. "Reviewing the numbers is not a yes, Acacia," he said, his voice dropping the veneer of patient negotiation. His tone hardened into a demand. "Tuesday is the deadline. Your brother cannot wait for a committee to approve his life. He needs a definitive answer right now." My mother set her ceramic mug onto the glass coffee table. The porcelain clicked sharply against the surface. She leaned forward, the maternal warmth draining from her features, replaced by a cold, calculating intensity. We did not drive through an hour of city traffic to get put on a wait list by our own daughter. I kept my distance near the rain-streaked window, maintaining a physical barrier between my executive reality and their emotional distortion. I realized the polite delay would not work. The illusion of a civilized family discussion evaporated, leaving only the raw, ugly truth of their entitlement. "My answer is no," I stated.
The word hung in the air, sharp and unyielding. I will not finance this venture. Gary shot up from the sofa, the sudden movement causing the cushions to shift. You have millions tied up in fleet expansions and warehouse leases. You throw money at green charities just to get your picture in local magazines. But when your own flesh and blood needs a lifeline, you suddenly close the vault. EcoFreight is a structured enterprise, Dad, I replied, my voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through my veins. Every dollar is allocated towards sustainable growth and rigorous compliance. Tyler does not represent an investment. Tyler is a liability. The word struck them like a physical blow. Susan gasped, pressing a hand to her chest in theatrical horror. A liability, she repeated, her voice trembling with rising indignation. He is your brother. He shares your DNA. How can you speak about him like he is a broken piece of equipment? I spoke the truth, I countered, refusing to soften the blow. He refuses to follow basic protocols. He alienates essential clients. He treats every opportunity like a burden. I brought him into my firm to keep the peace in this family, and he repaid that favor by jeopardizing my entire operation. I will not throw $50,000 into a black hole just to subsidize his refusal to grow up. The argument shifted rapidly from a financial request to a character assassination. My parents realized their golden child was losing the negotiation, so they pivoted to attacking my core identity. Gary began to pace across the hardwood floor, his wet fleece jacket rustling with each sharp pivot. You think you are so superior because you sit in a glass office, he sneered, pointing a thick finger in my direction. You lost your humanity somewhere along the climb. We raised you to value community, to lift people up. Instead, you turned into a greedy, calculating corporate drone. Susan stood up to join him, forming a wall of parental judgment. We watched you change over the years, Acacia. We watched you trade your compassion for profit margins. Tyler has a heart. He cares about people. He just needs a chance to prove himself in an environment that is not suffocated by your rigid rules. You fired him out of spite. You could not stand the thought of him succeeding on his own terms. The sheer audacity of their delusion took my breath away. They stood in the home my labor purchased, funded by the grueling graveyard shifts they never bothered to ask about, and called me greedy. They accused me of spite while defending a thief. The urge to grab the official police report from the kitchen counter flared burning hot in my throat. I wanted to slam the felony charges onto the glass table and watch their fragile, fabricated reality shatter into a million pieces. But revealing the trap prematurely would ruin the execution. I needed the snare to close around Tyler in a public, undeniable arena. Handing them the evidence tonight would only give him time to invent another lie. I had to swallow the bitter injustice and absorb their venom without breaking character. You are entitled to your opinion of my character, I said, keeping my posture straight and my gaze locked on my mother. But my financial decisions remain final. Susan took a step closer, her eyes flashing with a desperate, toxic fury. If you turn your back on him tonight, you turn your back on us. We will not maintain a relationship with a daughter who treats her family like disposable assets. If you refuse to write that check, you can consider yourself removed from this family. She delivered the ultimatum with supreme confidence, expecting the threat of disownment to break my resolve. For 32 years, I feared losing their approval. I bent my own boundaries to earn a fraction of the warmth they showered on Tyler. She assumed that old fear still governed my choices. She did not realize that the fear evaporated the moment I discovered the ghost shipments. You are a soulless suit, she spat, delivering the final intended kill shot. I looked at the woman who gave birth to me, feeling a profound, echoing emptiness where my familial devotion used to reside. The manipulation no longer worked. The strings were cut. Get out of my house, I commanded. The volume of my voice did not raise, but the density of the tone commanded immediate compliance. I pointed a single steady finger toward the heavy oak door. Gary stopped pacing,
Susan froze, her mouth slightly parted in shock. They expected tears, they expected frantic apologies, and desperate negotiations to save the relationship. They never anticipated an eviction. "I said, get out," I repeated, taking a slow, deliberate step toward them. "You came into my home to extort capital for a man who refuses to earn a living. You insulted my life work and threatened to disown me over a business decision. The conversation is over. Leave the premises before I call building security to escort you to the elevator." My father puffed his chest, attempting to salvage some remnant of patriarchal authority. "You will regret this, Acacia. When you are sitting alone in your empty ivory tower, you will realize that money cannot buy loyalty." He grabbed his wife by the elbow, steering her toward the entryway. Susan glared at me over her shoulder, her eyes brimming with unshed tears of rage. They marched out of the loft, the door slamming shut behind them, with a heavy final thud that vibrated through the floorboards. I stood in the silence of my living room, listening to the rain resume its rhythmic drumming against the glass. The air in the space felt lighter, yet charged with a dangerous static electricity. The immediate ambush was repelled, but the victory brought no relief. The family dynamics were irreparably fractured. The bridge was burned to ash. More importantly, I understood the strategic implications of what just transpired. Tyler dispatched them to secure the $50,000. By kicking them out empty-handed, I severed his only financial lifeline. The deadline for the missing funds loomed over his head, heavy and inescapable. He was trapped, penniless and terrified. A cornered predator does not surrender. It attacks the weakest point in the perimeter. I knew Tyler would not accept defeat gracefully. He would escalate the warfare. Since he could not extract my money, he would attempt to destroy my reputation. The silence in my loft was merely the calm eye of the storm. By Monday morning, the fallout would spread far beyond my living room, igniting a bitter public battle across the extended family network and dragging my Aunt Denise straight into the crossfire. The biting frost of Monday morning hardened the puddles outside my building into sheets of gray ice. My alarm clock was set for 5:30, but the incessant vibration of my phone woke me a full hour earlier. The device buzzed against the wooden nightstand in a relentless, frantic rhythm. I reached out my fingers, stiff from the lingering chill in the loft, and turned the screen toward my face. The blue glare illuminated the dark room, revealing a cascade of notifications that stretched beyond the borders of the display. The digital onslaught did not come from clients or vendors. The messages originated from my personal contacts. I opened the primary communication thread. The first text belonged to my cousin Jeremy, a barista who spent his weekends protesting commercial developments downtown. His message was brief and laced with venom. "I cannot believe what you did to your own brother. I thought you possessed a conscience." The next message came from Aunt Martha, my father's sister. "Money hollowed out your soul, Acacia. You should be ashamed of yourself." The barrage continued. Dozens of notifications stacked upon one another, each carrying a variation of the same toxic judgment. My pulse quickened, generating a steady drumbeat of rising adrenaline. I navigated to the main social platform our extended relatives frequented. Tyler occupied the top of the feed. He had published a lengthy, heavily curated public update at 2 a.m. He attached a black and white photograph of himself, looking exhausted but resolute, standing in front of a blurred urban background. The caption below the image read like a masterclass in psychological manipulation. Heartbroken, the post began. I gave my sweat and my loyalty to build a sustainable vision for a company I loved. I worked day and night to secure new partnerships and optimize our eco-footprint. But yesterday, I learned a devastating lesson. When your personal success threatens the ego of the person at the top, your hard work becomes a liability. I was terminated without cause because I secured a vendor lead that certain executives wanted to claim for themselves. Family should mean more than profit margins. I am starting over from zero today. My bank account is empty, but I kept my integrity intact.
Thank you to everyone reaching out with support during this dark chapter.
The engagement metrics beneath his fiction were staggering. The post boasted hundreds of supportive reactions. The comment section operated as an echo chamber of misplaced sympathy. Extended relatives, family friends, and local community members offered him words of encouragement, while simultaneously condemning my unnamed greed. My extended family consisted of sprawling, tight-knit Pacific Northwest idealists. They managed local cooperatives, ran community gardens, and championed grassroots organizations. They harbored an inherent distrust of corporate hierarchy and financial wealth. Tyler understood his audience with terrifying precision. He fed them the exact narrative they craved. He painted himself as the earnest grassroots worker crushed under the boot of a ruthless capitalist tyrant. He transformed his termination into a martyrdom. I sat on the edge of my mattress, staring at the screen, while the ambient temperature of the loft seemed to plummet. The betrayal pierced deeper than the financial theft. He stole my operating capital, but now he was actively incinerating my social foundation. He weaponized our community, turning the people who attended my childhood birthdays and high school graduations into a digital mob. My phone vibrated again, breaking the heavy silence. The caller identification displayed Aunt Denise. I answered the call immediately, pressing the cold glass against my ear. "Are you looking at this garbage?" Denise demanded. Her voice cut through the line, sharp and awake, punctuated by the faint clinking of a ceramic espresso cup. "I just read it," I replied, keeping my vocal cords steady. "My inbox is full of condemnations." Denise let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "It is worse than a single post, Acacia. Your brother is conducting a full-scale political campaign. He called me at midnight. He called your uncles. He spent the entire night calling every influential member of our network. Do you want to know the story he is selling? Tell me," I said. I stood up and walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city awaken under a pale, bruised sky. "He claims you discovered a competing logistics firm offered him a partnership." Denise explained, her tone dripping with disgust. "He says you fired him to nullify his non-compete clause and steal his proprietary client list. Furthermore, he is telling everyone that Gary and Susan went to your loft to beg for a peaceful resolution, and you threw your crying parents out into the freezing rain." I closed my eyes, absorbing the sheer scale of his fabrication. He crafted a lie so dense, so layered with emotional hooks, that truth alone felt inadequate to pierce it. He needed $50,000 to replace his embezzled funds. Since I denied him the capital, he decided to destroy my reputation so thoroughly that my eventual allegations against him would look like a desperate, vindictive counterattack. "He is rallying a witch hunt," Denise continued, her voice softening into a register of genuine concern. "My sister and her husband are backing his story. They are calling you a monster. Half the family is threatening to boycott your annual Green Charity Drive next month. They are drafting an open letter to the local business coalition. He is scorching the earth, Acacia. You cannot stay silent on this." For a brief, naive moment on Friday, I hoped to handle the embezzlement with sterile professionalism. I wanted to let the criminal justice system operate quietly behind closed doors. I wanted to spare my parents the agonizing public spectacle of seeing their beloved son placed in handcuffs. I believed a silent exit would minimize the collateral damage. Tyler erased that option. He decided peace was unacceptable. Ignoring the gossip was no longer a strategic advantage. It was a fatal vulnerability. Portland business culture thrived on reputation and ethical standing. If this narrative breached the perimeter of my extended family and reached my sustainable farming clients, the resulting scandal would hemorrhage contracts. Tyler was forcing my hand, pushing me into an arena I sought to avoid. "I cannot just issue a statement," I told Denise, leaning my forehead against the cold window pane. "Denials look like guilt. If I call him a liar, it becomes a typical dispute.
He said, she said. They will always side with the underdog. Then how do you stop a spreading fire? She asked.
You deprive it of oxygen, I answered, my executive instincts overriding the lingering sting of familial rejection.
I need to obliterate his fiction with undeniable physical proof. I need to expose him in front of the exact people enabling him, but I require a witness, someone whose integrity is unquestionable within our family structure. I am in, Denise stated without a second of hesitation. Tell me the plan. I need you to clear your schedule for Wednesday afternoon, I instructed, pacing across the hardwood floor, my mind rapidly constructing the architecture of a trap. I am going to invite Gary, Susan, and Tyler to my corporate boardroom. I will frame the invitation as a surrender. I will let them think I cracked under the social pressure and agreed to negotiate his bridge loan. They will walk in expecting a check, Denise noted, catching the rhythm of my strategy. They will walk into an execution, I corrected her, my voice dropping to a clinical, icy calm. I need you in that room to ensure they cannot rewrite history once the doors close. I want you to watch the delusion shatter. Consider it done, she promised, ending the call. I set the phone down on the kitchen island right next to the printed police report. The digital mob continued to swarm my notifications, buzzing with misplaced righteous fury. Tyler thought he possessed the upper hand because he controlled the emotional narrative. He believed his lies could outpace my facts. He forgot one crucial detail. While he was busy crafting fiction on social media, he still needed to cover his digital tracks before the authorities served the warrant. His desperation for funds and his need to destroy my proprietary data would inevitably drive him to make a fatal mistake. The extended family war was merely a distraction. The real battle was about to take place on my corporate servers, and I knew exactly what bait to leave out for him to secure his ultimate destruction. The social media spectacle raged throughout Monday, generating a toxic cloud of digital gossip that suffocated my extended family network. I ignored every incoming message, allowing my cousins and aunts to exhaust their self-righteous indignation. Their anger meant nothing compared to the quiet, lethal trap currently resting inside my corporate servers. Tyler believed he was winning a public relations war. He failed to understand that public relations cannot pay legal retainers or balance stolen ledgers. By Tuesday at 2 a.m, desperation finally eclipsed his arrogance. I was sitting at my kitchen island, nursing a cup of black tea, when my secure, encrypted phone vibrated against the marble. The screen displayed a single word from Elias. The message read, "Target acquired." I drove to the EcoFreight headquarters in record time, navigating the empty, rain-slicked streets of downtown Portland. The building stood dark and silent, a fortress of glass and steel. I swiped my executive badge, bypassing the main lobby security, and took the elevator directly to the server room on the 4th floor. The environment inside the server room was chilled to a precise 65 degrees, filled with the continuous hypnotic hum of cooling fans and the rapid blinking of blue indicator lights. Elias sat hunched over a mobile diagnostic terminal, his face bathed in the harsh glow of 3 separate monitors. He did not look up when I entered. He simply pointed to the center screen. "He is inside the perimeter," Elias whispered, his fingers flying across his illuminated keyboard. I stepped behind his chair, resting my hands on the cool metal of his workstation. The screen displayed a live feed of our network architecture, overlaid with a tracing program that tracked external data requests. A jagged red line pulsed across the digital map, originating from a familiar residential internet provider and snaking its way through our firewall defenses. How did he bypass the shadow lock? I asked, my chest tightening with a sudden spike of adrenaline. He did not use his primary credentials, Elias explained, tracking the red line as it navigated our directory. He found a legacy backdoor. It is an old virtual private network protocol we used during our initial beta testing phase 3 years ago. The development team was supposed to patch it, but the port remained open. My mind raced, calculating the implications. Tyler was not a skilled hacker. He possessed average technical literacy at best. Finding that legacy port meant he had spent hours, perhaps days, probing our network infrastructure, looking for a forgotten window he could pry open. The social media post was a smokescreen to distract me while he hunted for a way back inside. "What is his target?" I asked, watching the red line pause at a specific internal directory. Elias typed a command to reveal the destination folder. The breath caught in my throat. The screen displayed the title of our master vendor registry. The vendor registry was the lifeblood of EcoFreight Solutions. It contained the contact information, proprietary pricing models, and logistical routing preferences for every sustainable farm, biodegradable packaging supplier, and green energy cooperative in the Pacific Northwest. I spent 7 years building that database. I drove to remote agricultural counties, shook hands with cooperative leaders, and negotiated exclusive ethical transport contracts. A rival logistics firm attempting to break into the green sector would pay 6 figures for that localized data. Tyler was attempting to manifest his lie into reality. He told our parents a Seattle competitor recruited him. Now facing an inescapable $50,000 deficit, he intended to steal my proprietary client list and sell it to the highest bidder to generate the cash he needed to replace the embezzled funds. He is trying to initiate a bulk download, Elias noted, his voice sharp with professional offense. He wants the entire directory. "Do not block him," I instructed, my executive instincts taking full command of the situation. "Let him grab the file." Elias turned his chair, looking at me with genuine alarm. "Acacia, if that data leaves this building, your competitors will undercut every contract you hold. We will lose 30% of our market share in a month." "He is not going to get the real data," I countered. A cold, predatory calm settling over my mind. Route his download request to the honeypot server. Give him the dummy file we created for compliance testing. Let him think he succeeded. I want the system to record the exact moment he attempts to export proprietary corporate data to a private server. Elias smiled a grim, satisfied expression and turned back to his terminal. He executed a silent reroute. On the monitor, we watched Tyler initiate the download command. The network logged his physical location, his machine identification address, and the precise timestamp of the data breach. The system fed him a massive file, filled with randomized, useless text generators, disguised under our official letterhead. The download completed at 2:45 in the morning. Tyler severed the connection and vanished into the digital ether, blissfully unaware he had just upgraded his impending criminal charges from standard embezzlement to felony corporate cyber espionage. I did not sleep for the rest of the night. At 8 in the morning, I walked through the doors of the Portland Police Bureau, carrying a new sealed dossier. Detective Ramirez sat at his desk drinking coffee from a foam cup. He looked surprised to see me return so quickly. I sat down across from him and slid the fresh cyber intrusion logs over the scratched metal surface of his desk. "He tried to breach the main servers last night," I informed the detective. "He bypassed a firewall to access a legacy port and attempted to download our proprietary vendor database. We captured the intrusion in real time." Ramirez set his coffee down, his cynical demeanor shifting into sharp, focused attention. He opened the folder and reviewed the technical readouts Elias had prepared. The detective understood the gravity of the new evidence immediately. Corporate data theft carried mandatory minimum sentencing guidelines and elevated the investigation to a specialized task force level. "Embezzling routing funds is a messy financial crime," Ramirez muttered, tracing a finger over the mapped internet protocol addresses. "It takes time to prove intent, but breaking into a secured corporate server to steal trade secrets is a direct, undeniable felony. This changes the entire timeline." "How fast?" I asked. Ramirez closed the folder and looked me dead in the eye. "I am walking this to the district attorney before lunch. With this level of verified digital evidence, a judge will sign an arrest warrant by this afternoon. We can pick him up at his apartment tonight. The image of police officers kicking down the door of his luxury loft flashed through my mind. It would be efficient, clean, and entirely out of my control. My parents would receive a panicked phone call from the precinct. They would hire expensive defense attorneys, post his bail, and continue to believe his narrative of victimization. They would convince themselves the cyber intrusion was just another fabricated charge designed by their jealous corporate drone of a daughter. I could not let him hide behind his false martyrdom. I needed my parents to witness the collapse of his lies in real time, trapped in a space where they could not spin the narrative or blame the system. "Detective Ramirez," I said, keeping my posture perfectly still. "I have cooperated fully. I provided the financial ledgers, the forged documents, and the cyber intrusion logs. I delivered a completed investigation. I am asking for one strategic favor in return." Ramirez leaned back, crossing his arms over his chest. "I do not delay active warrants, Ms. Smith. He is a flight risk now that he possesses what he thinks is valuable data. He is not going to run," I assured him. "He believes he has a buyer, and he thinks he is untouchable. Do not arrest him at his apartment tonight. Execute the warrant tomorrow afternoon." "Why tomorrow?" the detective asked, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "Because he is coming to my headquarters tomorrow at 3 o'clock, I replied, my voice dropping to a smooth, calculated rhythm. "He is bringing our parents to negotiate a financial settlement he thinks I am going to pay. I want him arrested inside my corporate boardroom. I want the people enabling him to sit across a table and watch the handcuffs close around his wrists, surrounded by the exact evidence he claims does not exist." Ramirez studied my face for a long, silent moment. He searched for signs of hesitation or petty sibling rivalry, but he found nothing except cold, unyielding resolve. He recognized the necessity of destroying the enabler network to prevent future corporate retaliation. 3 o'clock tomorrow, Ramirez finally agreed, tapping his pen against the dossier. "Have your security clear the freight elevators for my officers. We will handle the rest." I walked out of the precinct into the crisp Tuesday morning air, feeling the heavy weight of the impending execution settle into my bones. The trap was officially set. The legal hammer was raised. All that remained was baiting the snare. I pulled out my phone and composed a carefully crafted text message to my parents, requesting a formal family meeting to discuss Tyler and his bridge loan. I knew their arrogant, triumphant response would arrive within seconds, setting the stage for a boardroom confrontation that would redefine the meaning of corporate accountability. I sat in the driver's seat of my car outside the police precinct and drafted the text message. It required a physical effort to soften my syntax, forcing myself to mimic the tone of a daughter breaking under the weight of parental pressure. I typed the words slowly, ensuring every syllable dripped with feigned surrender. "Mom, Dad, I have spent the last 2 days reflecting on our conversation. I realize my reaction on Sunday was defensive and inappropriate. Let us hold a formal family meeting tomorrow at 3 in my boardroom to discuss the bridge loan and finalize his financial future. Please bring Tyler so we can sign the paperwork together." It took less than 4 minutes for the reply to appear on my screen. My father sent it. "We knew you would remember your roots and do the right thing, Acacia. We will see you at 3. The smug arrogance bleeding through those pixels made my stomach turn, but it confirmed the snare was set. They believed they had won. They thought my corporate armor had finally cracked under their emotional extortion. Wednesday arrived with a heavy, persistent Pacific Northwest downpour. The sky over Portland hung low and bruised, matching the cold, sterile atmosphere I cultivated inside the EcoFreight headquarters. I spent the morning treating my impending family reunion like a hostile corporate acquisition. Every detail required surgical precision. I reserved the executive boardroom on the top floor. It was a formidable space, designed to intimidate aggressive vendors and showcase our institutional power. The center of the room featured an expansive, custom-built glass table, resting on a base of reclaimed timber. Floor-to-ceiling windows dominated the western wall, offering a sweeping, uninterrupted view of the rain-slicked city skyline. I lowered the ambient temperature of the room to exactly 66 degrees. I wanted the physical environment to reflect the freezing reality they were about to face. I removed several leather chairs from the room, leaving only 5 seats. I positioned 3 chairs on one side of the glass table for Gary, Susan, and Tyler. I placed 1 chair at the head of the table for myself. I placed the final chair in the corner near the door for my neutral witness. Control over the physical space dictates the flow of power in any negotiation. By forcing them to sit shoulder to shoulder, facing me across the transparent glass, I established a clear visual boundary. They were no longer my family walking into a living room. They were hostile entities walking into a tribunal. At noon, I finalized the printed dossiers. I used thick, stark white folders to bind the evidence. Inside the first section of each folder, I placed the banking ledgers detailing the ghost shipments. The second section contained the Internet Protocol tracking data and the digital footprints linking the dummy corporation to his residential address. The third section held the cyber intrusion logs Elias captured early Tuesday morning, proving the attempted theft of our vendor registry. The final document, resting at the very back of the folder, was a copy of the official police report and the pending felony arrest warrant. I placed 1 folder at each of the 3 empty seats. I called my head of building security. I instructed him to disable the access panels for the freight elevators at exactly 2:50 in the afternoon. The only individuals cleared to bypass the lobby and ride those specific elevators were Detective Ramirez and his plainclothes officers. The trap was synchronized down to the minute. Aunt Denise arrived at 2 o'clock. She walked into the boardroom wearing a sharp charcoal gray blazer that mirrored my own executive wardrobe. She carried 2 cups of black coffee from a local roastery. She handed me one, taking in the calculated arrangement of the room. Her dark eyes scanned the pristine glass table, the aligned white folders, and the weeping windows. "You engineered a slaughterhouse," she noted, her voice low and resonant, echoing slightly against the glass walls. I took a slow sip of the bitter coffee. "I engineered a mirror," I corrected her. "They are going to sit down and look at their own reflections. I cannot let them twist the narrative this time. I need you here to anchor the truth. When they try to rewrite history, when they try to claim I set him up, you are the only person in our family network who can verify the exact sequence of events." Denise nodded, taking her designated seat in the corner. "I did not come here to mediate, Acacia. I came here to watch you cut the dead weight loose. You protect your empire. I will manage the fallout with the extended relatives once the dust settles." The final hour stretched into an agonizing test of endurance. I sat at the head of the table, listening to the rhythmic drumming of the rain against the glass. My physiological state remained surprisingly calm, my pulse beat with a steady mechanical rhythm. The anxiety that plagued my childhood, the desperate yearning for their approval, had burned away entirely. It was replaced by a profound, icy detachment. I mourned the family I wished I had, and I buried them to protect the life I built. I thought about Tyler probably picking out a designer outfit to wear for his triumphant return to my office. He likely convinced himself that his cyber intrusion attempt went unnoticed. He assumed the dummy vendor file he downloaded was genuine, and he was ready to play the gracious victim, accepting my apologies and my capital. He believed his web of deceit held strong. I thought about my parents driving through the city traffic, congratulating themselves on their parenting skills. They believed their emotional manipulation successfully broke my boundaries. They expected me to hand over a check for $50,000 and beg for their forgiveness. They assumed blood loyalty superseded corporate law. At 2:45, my desktop phone chirped. The lobby receptionist announced their arrival. I instructed her to issue them temporary visitor badges and direct them to the executive suite. I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from my blazer. I checked the ceiling-mounted projector, ensuring the standby screen displayed the Eco-Freight logo in crisp, high definition. Every piece of the snare rested in perfect alignment. The emotional detachment shielded my core, leaving only the calculating executive ready to execute the final maneuver. The distant hum of the elevator signaled their ascent. The heavy metal doors chimed, breaking the silence of the top floor. Footsteps echoed down the carpeted hallway, growing louder with each passing second. The arrogant shadow of my brother appeared through the frosted glass of the boardroom door, followed closely by the silhouettes of my mother and father. The war was no longer an abstract concept. It was standing right outside my door, turning the handle and walking blindly into the abyss. The heavy boardroom door swung open on silent hinges. Tyler entered the room first. He wore a crisp navy suit and a pair of polished leather loafers that looked suspiciously brand new, likely purchased on a credit card in anticipation of a lucrative afternoon. He carried himself with a loose, rolling swagger, projecting the unearned confidence of a man who believed he had outsmarted the entire world. My father followed closely behind his son. Gary wore a sports coat over a button-down shirt, stepping into my executive suite with the expansive posture of a disappointed patriarch arriving to restore order. He surveyed the glass table and the floor-to-ceiling windows, nodding as if he owned the space, and graciously allowed me to occupy it. My mother trailed them both, clutching a designer handbag against her chest. Susan offered a thin, tight smile, her eyes sweeping over the room until they landed on Aunt Denise, sitting silently in the corner. Susan faltered for a fraction of a second, surprised to see her half-sister present. Gary placed a reassuring hand on the lower back of his wife, steering her toward the chairs. They assumed Denise was there as a mediator, a neutral party invited to witness my eventual surrender and ensure the family peace remained intact. They took their designated seats on the opposite side of the transparent glass table. Tyler sat in the center, directly across from me. He leaned back in the ergonomic leather chair, crossing his ankles and resting his hands on his stomach. Gary took the seat to his left, leaning forward and resting his forearms on the edge of the glass. Susan sat on the right, keeping her purse in her lap like a shield. I remained standing at the head of the table. I looked at the three of them, a unified front of entitlement and delusion, and felt the final trace of familial obligation evaporate into the chilled air of the room. I turned my back on them and walked toward the entrance. I grasped the heavy steel handle of the door and engaged the deadbolt. A sharp metallic click echoed through the quiet space. The sound was distinct and final. The perimeter was secure. The point of no return was crossed. I walked back to my chair and sat down. The three stark white folders rested in front of them, pristine and untouched. Gary cleared his throat, eager to control the tempo of the meeting. He delivered a practiced, condescending sigh.
I am glad you came to your senses, Acacia. It takes a big person to admit when they let their pride get in the way of their judgment. Your mother and I spent a lot of time discussing how this dispute got out of hand. We are willing to put Sunday night behind us. We just want to focus on the future and get your brother the capital he needs to secure his new partnership in Seattle.
Susan nodded, reaching out to pat the sleeve of her son. Family heals, she added, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. That is what we do. We forgive and we move forward. You are doing the right thing today, sweetheart. You are remembering your roots. Tyler offered a slow, magnanimous nod. He looked at me with a sickening expression of false grace, playing the role of the wounded visionary, ready to pardon his jealous sister. I am willing to wipe the slate clean, Acacia. I know my success was intimidating for you to watch. We both said things we regret. If we can finalize the bridge loan today, I will not mention the wrongful termination to the industry coalition. I think $50,000 is a fair price to settle the disruption you caused my career. He reached a hand toward the white folder resting on the glass in front of him, assuming the heavy cardstock contained a cashier check and a drafted loan agreement. Do not open that yet, I instructed. My voice was quiet, but it carried a sharp metallic edge that stopped his hand in midair. Tyler frowned, his fingers hovering over the cover. The casual swagger began to dissolve, replaced by a subtle, creeping hesitation. Gary shifted in his seat, the leather creaking loudly in the quiet room. "We do not need to drag this out with corporate lectures," Gary said, his tone dipping into impatience. "We all have busy schedules. Just give him the paperwork so we can finalize the transfer." I did not reply to my father. I picked up the small black remote resting next to my keyboard. I pressed the power button. A low mechanical hum emanated from the ceiling as the high-definition projector powered on. The automated blackout blinds hummed to life, descending over the floor-to-ceiling windows, plunging the boardroom into a dim, shadow-filled theater. The only source of light came from the projector lens, casting a blinding white rectangle against the far wall. I tapped the trackpad on my laptop. The standby screen vanished. The first slide appeared. It was not an apology. It was not a loan agreement. It was a high-contrast, line-by-line bank statement. The header of the document displayed the name Green Horizon Enterprises in bold black text. Below the name, the state registry identified a physical address located in the Pearl District. The center of the screen featured a chronological ledger of deposits. Each line item represented a transfer originating from the EcoFreight carbon offset routing accounts. The amount started small in October and escalated rapidly through the winter months. The bottom row displayed a highlighted summation total, $50,240. The atmosphere inside the boardroom shifted with incredible speed. The air grew thick and suffocating. The arrogant expectation that filled the room just seconds prior vanished, sucked into the vacuum of the glowing screen. Gary narrowed his eyes, squinting at the projected numbers, his brow furrowed in genuine confusion. He leaned closer to the glass table, trying to make sense of the accounting ledger. "What is this?" he asked, his voice losing its authoritative bass. "Is this the Seattle firm? Why are you showing us an expense report?" Susan looked at the screen, then looked at me, her artificial smile fading into a flat line of uncertainty. "Acacia, we are not here to review your corporate spreadsheets. We are here to finalize the bridge loan." I kept my gaze fixed on my brother. Tyler did not ask any questions. He did not speak a single word. The color drained from his face with terrifying speed, leaving his skin a pale, sickly gray. His breathing turned shallow and rapid. He stared at the projection, his eyes tracking the specific routing numbers he thought he had buried under layers of encrypted code. The false narrative he spun about a rival logistics firm, a prestigious partnership, and a jealous sister disintegrated in the harsh light of the projector. He recognized the banking metrics. He recognized the registered address of the dummy corporation because he paid rent for that exact apartment every month. The realization that the silent audit was complete, that the evidence was compiled and verified, hit him like a physical strike to the chest. He looked away from the screen and stared at the white folder resting inches from his hands. He finally understood what type of documentation waited inside. "That is not the Seattle firm, Dad," I stated, my voice echoing through the chilled, darkened room. "That is a shell company registered to the apartment you co-signed for your son." Gary froze. The words hung in the air, heavy and jagged. He looked at Tyler, expecting his boy to immediately interject to explain away the confusion with another smooth anecdote. But Tyler remained paralyzed, his jaw locked, his eyes wide with a frantic, inescapable terror. Susan shook her head, a nervous flutter in her hands as she clutched her designer purse. "I do not understand," she whispered, her voice trembling in the silence. "What does his apartment have to do with your routing accounts?" The climax initiated. The fragile illusion they worshipped for 29 years shattered against the cold, undeniable metrics of reality. I sat at the head of the table, watching the predators realize they had just walked willingly into a steel cage. The trap was sprung, and there was nowhere left to run. The glow of the projector illuminated the horror on my father's face. I did not give them time to process the shock. I began my explanation with the clinical detachment of a lead prosecutor presenting a capital case. You demanded to know why my company refused to provide a bridge loan, I stated, locking my gaze on Gary. The answer is currently displayed on the wall behind you. Your son did not secure a prestigious partnership in Seattle. He never received a job offer from a rival logistics firm. That entire narrative was a desperate fiction designed to extract capital from your retirement savings to cover his tracks. I clicked the remote. The next slide rendered a complex flowchart detailing our internal software architecture. For the past 2 quarters, I continued my brother abused his administrative access within our network. Eco Freight allocates specific capital to regional biodiesel suppliers to offset our carbon footprint. These funds are vital to our ethical certifications. Tyler bypassed our primary vendors. He generated fraudulent invoices, logged fake freight manifests into the system, and funneled those environmental tax disbursements into his own private limited liability company. He created ghost shipments, moving invisible cargo across the state to justify the payouts. Susan shook her head, her hands fluttering in a frantic, uncoordinated rhythm. "No," she protested, her voice thin and reedy, grasping at the last shreds of her maternal delusion. "Tyler is not an accountant. He does not know how to build a shell company. He struggles to balance his own checking account. You are confusing him with someone else. There must be a mistake in your computers." Tyler recognized the collapsing perimeter. His survival instinct kicked in, manifesting as pure, unfiltered panic. He slammed his palms against the glass table, pushing himself out of the ergonomic chair. "This is a setup!" he shouted, his voice echoing sharply against the boardroom walls. "She manufactured these ledgers. I told you she was jealous. She hacked my apartment network and planted those routing numbers to frame me because I found a better career path. Do not listen to her. She is forging evidence to destroy my reputation because she knows I am going to outshine her." His outburst was loud, erratic, and utterly pathetic. He paced behind his chair, pointing a trembling finger in my direction, weaving a frantic conspiracy theory about corporate espionage and sibling jealousy. He looked like a trapped animal thrashing against a steel snare. Gary watched his son, the certainty in his eyes beginning to fracture. The patriarch who entered my suite ready to issue commands now looked like an old, frightened man trying to understand a foreign language. The confident swagger Tyler usually possessed was replaced by the erratic twitching of a guilty conscience. I allowed Tyler to rant for exactly 30 seconds. I let him expend his energy, watching him dig the hole deeper in front of our silent witness. Aunt Denise sat in the corner, her expression carved from stone, observing the meltdown without uttering a single syllable. Her presence acted as an anchor, preventing my parents from claiming I cornered them without oversight. When Tyler paused to draw a ragged breath, trying to invent another layer to his ridiculous lie, I delivered the killing blow. I picked up the thick white folder resting on my side of the table. I raised it a few inches into the air and brought it down hard. The heavy cardstock struck the glass surface with a sharp, echoing crack that sounded like a gunshot in the darkened room. "Sit down and open your folders," I commanded. The volume of my voice remained low, but the density of the instruction carried an inescapable weight. Tyler froze. He looked at the white binder resting near his abandoned chair. His chest heaved with rapid, shallow breaths. He refused to move. Gary, however, slowly reached his hands forward. His fingers trembled as he grasped the edge of the cover. He flipped the cardstock open. Susan leaned over his shoulder, her eyes darting across the printed pages. The first section displayed the exact internet protocol addresses, matching the router inside the apartment Gary co-signed. The second section showed high-definition screen captures of the fraudulent invoices bearing my copied administrative signature. I walked them through every single page with ruthless precision. The exact total is $50,240, I reciting the metric that had burned into my memory over the silent audit. He stole from my operating budget, jeopardized my ethical standing, and then drove to your house to trick you into replacing the stolen funds before my fiscal review discovered the deficit. He played you for fools. Gary turned the pages, his breath catching in his throat. He flipped to the final section of the dossier. He stared at the thick, embossed paper resting at the back. It was not an internal corporate memo. It bore the official seal of the Portland Police Bureau. The header identified the Commercial Crimes Division. The black ink looked stark and final against the white page. "Read the top line," I instructed my father. "Read it out loud so your wife can hear the truth."
Gary swallowed hard. The robust, confident father who spent his life fixing his son's blunders now faced a crisis he could not buy his way out of. When Tyler totaled his first sedan in high school, Gary simply wrote a check to the dealership. When Tyler failed his university courses, Gary paid the tuition penalties and blamed the professors. But Gary possessed enough business acumen to recognize a state-sanctioned felony warrant. There was no check large enough to erase the seal of the district attorney. The protective bubble he built around his boy just popped. Tyler James Smith. Gary read, his voice cracking, reduced to a hollow rasp. Case number 48209. Primary charge. Gary stopped. His eyes watered. The color drained from his face, leaving his skin ashen and hollow. The words seemed to choke him. "Read the charge, Dad," I pushed, refusing to grant them a single inch of mercy. "Felony grand theft by embezzlement." Gary finished the words tumbling from his lips like broken glass. He dropped the paper. His broad shoulders collapsed inward, the posture of a defeated man, crumbling under the weight of a lifelong failure. He stared at the glass table, his mind short-circuiting as the reality of the situation severed his deepest parental illusions. Susan let out a sharp, wounded sob. She pressed both hands over her mouth, tears spilling over her cheeks, ruining her careful makeup. She looked at her golden child, the boy she spent 3 decades shielding from reality. The illusion was dead. Her brilliant, misunderstood visionary was a common thief who exploited her love to cover his crimes. She could no longer blame my jealousy. She could no longer blame the cruel corporate world. The evidence was irrefutable. The bravado drained out of Tyler. The arrogant sneer, the victim complex, the loud conspiracy theories, all of it evaporated into the chilled air. His legs gave out. He fell back into his leather chair, a deflated, terrified shell of a man. He looked at the police report, then looked at his father, searching for the familiar rescue operation that was never going to arrive. He reached a shaking hand toward Gary. "Dad, please," Tyler begged, his voice shrinking into a high, desperate whine. "You have to help me. You have lawyers. We can fight this. She is setting me up. Tell her to drop the charges. Tell her you will pay the $50,000. We can fix this right now." Gary did not answer. He pulled his arm away, recoiling from the touch of his own son. Susan wept silently, rocking slightly in her chair, unable to look at either of her children. The dynamic was permanently dismantled. The toxic triangle of enabling and entitlement lay in ruins across my boardroom table. I stood at the head of the table, absorbing the devastation. I felt no triumph, only the sterile satisfaction of a surgeon excising a malignant tumor. I delivered the truth, destroying the lies that plagued my existence for years, but the legal hammer was still suspended in the air. Tyler thought a check could still save him. He believed returning the money would magically erase the police report. He did not know about the secondary crime he committed the night before, and he certainly did not know that the building security had just disabled the freight elevators to welcome his new escorts. The heavy silence in the executive suite stretched into an agonizing void. The high-definition projector continued to cast the stark banking ledger against the far wall, bathing the room in a harsh white light. Gary stared at the official felony complaint resting in the dossier. The realization that his patriarchal authority held zero jurisdiction over the criminal justice system began to penetrate his mind. The robust, confident father slowly dissolved, leaving a hollowed, aging man
desperately searching for a financial escape hatch.
He dragged a trembling hand across his face, wiping away the cold sweat forming on his brow. He looked up, his eyes bloodshot and pleading, attempting to summon the familiar tone of a seasoned negotiator.
"We can fix this," Gary offered his voice, lacking any trace of its former command. His words tumbled out in a frantic, uncoordinated rush. "You do not need to involve the authorities, Acacia. Keep this within the family. We will remortgage the Lake Oswego house. We have equity. I can drain my retirement portfolio tomorrow morning. We will write you a cashier check for the full $50,000 before the banks close. You get your operating capital back, and we withdraw this complaint. No one else ever needs to know."
Susan nodded, vigorous grasping at the lifeline her husband threw onto the glass table.
"Yes," she whimpered, her painted fingernails digging into the leather strap of her purse. "We will pay for his mistake. We will make you whole. Please, sweetheart, just pick up the phone and cancel the investigation. You have the power to stop this nightmare."
I sat motionless at the head of the boardroom. The sheer density of their ignorance was staggering. They still believed the universe operated according to their suburban rules. They assumed a checkbook could erase a state-sanctioned felony. I looked at the two people who raised me, feeling no anger, only the sterile detachment of an executive enforcing corporate boundaries.
"You cannot buy your way out of a grand theft charge." "Dad," I stated, maintaining a steady, unforgiving rhythm, "Eco Freight Solutions is a heavily regulated enterprise. We undergo rigorous external audits to maintain our green certifications. Our corporate insurance policy mandates an immediate law enforcement filing for any internal discrepancy exceeding $10,000. The moment Elias confirmed the diverted routing funds, the reporting protocol engaged. If I accept your money and conceal his theft, I become an accessory to corporate fraud. I would risk my own freedom and the licenses of my entire fleet just to shield him. I will not burn my empire to the ground to keep your fragile illusion intact."
Tyler shifted in his seat, a low, panicked whimper escaping his throat. He understood the rigidity of corporate compliance. He knew the financial loophole was closed. Gary opened his mouth to argue, preparing to offer a higher sum, a larger sacrifice, anything to save his golden child. I raised a single hand, stopping his negotiation before it materialized. "Furthermore," I continued, my tone dropping into a lower, colder register, "the $50,000 is no longer the primary issue." The projector clicked. The screen behind them shifted from the banking ledger to the complex network diagnostic overlay Elias captured the previous night. The red intrusion lines pulsed across the digital map. Susan turned her head, squinting at the unfamiliar technical readouts. Tyler froze, his eyes widening as he recognized the directory pathways displayed on the screen. The blood drained from his face a second time, leaving him looking like a ghost haunting his own execution. "Your son realized the financial theft was discovered," I explained, walking my parents through the final layer of his betrayal. He knew he needed capital to hire defense attorneys, so at 2:45 yesterday morning, he bypassed a legacy firewall on my secure network. He attempted to download my proprietary vendor registry, a database worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, to my competitors. He intended to sell my trade secrets to the highest bidder. Gary stared at the digital map, his breathing shallow and rapid. He looked at Tyler, seeking a denial, hoping his boy would shout down the accusation. Tyler remained entirely mute, his chin trembling, his gaze fixed firmly on the polished glass surface of the table. "That is not a messy accounting error," I informed my parents, delivering the unvarnished reality. "That is felony corporate cyber espionage. The state of Oregon is pressing those charges. The district attorney possesses the Internet Protocol logs. The Cyber Crimes Task Force holds the forged digital signatures. The investigation escalated far beyond my control the second he tried to breach my secure servers. I could not withdraw the complaint even if I wanted to.
The machine is already moving. The finality of this statement crushed the remaining oxygen out of the room. Gary slumped back into his leather chair, the fight permanently extinguished from his posture. Susan covered her face with both hands, her quiet sobbing filling the cold air. They were paralyzed. The cognitive dissonance shattered, leaving them stranded in a desolate wasteland of undeniable truth. They were not looking at a misunderstood visionary. They were sitting next to a desperate, calculating criminal. Aunt Denise remained silent in the corner, her arms crossed over her charcoal blazer. She watched the toxic triangle collapse, her presence anchoring the room, ensuring no one could claim this outcome was unjust. A sharp electronic chime pierced the heavy atmosphere. The sleek intercom unit resting near my laptop glowed with a faint blue light. The lobby receptionist was buzzing the executive suite. I pressed the silver reception button, allowing the audio to broadcast through the integrated boardroom speakers. Ms. Smith, the receptionist, announced, her voice slightly strained. "There are 2 plainclothes detectives in the lobby. They are requesting immediate access to the top floor. They stated they have official business regarding a former employee." Tyler launched himself out of the ergonomic chair. The leather seat spun backward, hitting the glass wall with a loud thud. He darted toward the heavy steel door, driven by blind, primal terror. He grabbed the handle and twisted, shaking the metal fixture. The deadbolt held firm. He turned back to the room, his chest heaving, his eyes wide and frantic like a trapped animal, sensing the approaching predator. "Let them up," I instructed the receptionist, removing my finger from the intercom button. Tyler stumbled away from the door, his polished loafers slipping slightly on the carpet. He rushed toward his father, grabbing the sleeve of Gary's sports coat. "Dad, you have to stop them," Tyler begged, his voice cracking into a hysterical pitch. "Tell them it is a mistake. Call your lawyers. Do not let them take me." Gary did not move. He did not reach out to comfort his son. He kept his eyes fixed on the illuminated projector screen, unable to look at the boy he ruined with endless leniency. Tyler spun toward his mother. "Mom, please," he cried, falling to his knees beside her chair. "Tell her to open the door. I cannot go to jail. I will not survive in there. Please, you have to protect me." Susan kept her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking with violent, uncontrollable grief. She offered no soothing words. She provided no miraculous rescue. For the first time in 29 years, the safety net vanished. The parents who subsidized his entire existence sat frozen in their seats, paralyzed by the crushing weight of reality. They finally understood that intervening would only drag them into the abyss alongside him. Heavy footsteps echoed down the carpeted hallway outside the boardroom. The sound grew louder, steady, and inexorable. I tapped a command on my laptop, disengaging the electronic deadbolt. The heavy steel door swung inward. Detective Ramirez stepped into the dim, chilled room, followed closely by a second plainclothes officer. They wore dark suits and carried an aura of practiced, undeniable authority. Ramirez scanned the space, his eyes sweeping past the weeping mother and the defeated father, before locking onto the man kneeling on the floor. Tyler James Smith Ramirez stated, his voice a low, echoing rumble that filled every corner of the executive suite. Tyler did not answer. He slowly rose to his feet, his posture slumping inward, gravity pulling his shoulders toward the floor. The frantic energy abandoned him. The realization that charm manipulation and parental wealth held zero currency in this room finally broke his spirit. Ramirez unclipped a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. The metallic rattle sounded sharp and foreign against the backdrop of my corporate aesthetic. The detective stepped forward, placing a firm hand on the shoulder of my brother, turning him toward the glass wall. "You are under arrest for grand theft and corporate cyber intrusion." Ramirez recited, executing the procedure with swift, mechanical precision. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." There was no dramatic physical struggle. There were no shouted threats or violent resistance. Tyler offered his wrists to the officers with the hollow compliance of a man who knew his war was lost. The handcuffs snapped shut, the locking mechanisms clicking into place, securing his hands behind his back. "You have the right to an attorney," the second officer continued, grasping Tyler by the bicep and guiding him toward the exit. "If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you."
Tyler cast one final desperate look over his shoulder. He did not look at me. He looked at Gary and Susan, searching their faces for a final shred of hope. They kept their heads bowed, refusing to witness the physical culmination of their parenting. The officers escorted him through the doorway, their heavy footsteps fading down the hallway, marching toward the secured freight elevator. The heavy steel door closed behind them, sealing the boardroom once again. The silence that followed was deafening, a thick, suffocating vacuum left in the wake of the legal hammer. The digital mob, the smear campaign, and the endless years of double standards were obliterated in a matter of minutes. The execution was flawless, leaving nothing but the wreckage of a shattered family dynamic scattered across the pristine glass table. The heavy steel door sealed shut, trapping the echoes of the metallic handcuffs in the hallway. Inside the executive boardroom, the silence descended like a thick winter fog. The high-definition projector continued to cast the stark accounting ledger against the wall, bathing the room in a clinical white glow. Gary and Susan remained frozen in their leather chairs. They looked like statues carved from grief and denial. The patriarch who walked into my corporate headquarters, ready to issue demands, now sat with his shoulders curved inward, staring at his empty hands. The mother who threatened to disown me just days prior now gazed blankly at the polished glass table, her tears drying into tight, shining tracks across her cheeks. The toxic dynamic that defined our family for 3 decades lay shattered across the boardroom. They could no longer hide behind their golden child syndrome. The state of Oregon had just escorted their brilliant visionary into a squad car. I picked up the small black remote and pressed the power button. The projector hummed down. The blackout blinds slowly retracted, rolling upward to reveal the sweeping Portland skyline. The storm had passed, leaving behind a pale, crisp afternoon light that filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The natural illumination washed away the shadows, exposing the stark reality of the room. "It is time for you to leave," I stated. My voice contained no anger, no vindictive triumph, and no lingering sorrow. It held only the calm, steady resonance of an executive closing a finalized negotiation. Gary slowly lifted his head. He looked at me, searching my face for a trace of the desperate daughter who used to crave his validation. He found nothing but an impenetrable boundary. He did not attempt to argue. He did not ask for a glass of water or a moment to compose himself. The undeniable proof in the white folders stripped him of his authority. He stood up on shaking legs, his joints popping in the quiet room. He reached down and gently grasped the elbow of his wife. "Come on, Susan," Gary whispered, his voice hollow and fragile. "We need to find a lawyer." Susan rose from her chair without looking at me. She picked up her designer purse, holding it against her chest like a protective shield. They walked toward the boardroom exit, their footsteps dragging across the carpet. They did not look back. They opened the door and disappeared into the hallway, beginning the long, agonizing descent to the lobby. Aunt Denise stood up from her corner seat. She walked over to the glass table, gathered the 3 pristine white dossiers, and handed them to me. She offered a single, firm nod of approval. "The surgeon cuts out the rot so the body can survive," Denise said softly. "You did what you had to do, Acacia. Now, you let them deal with the infection." The following weeks unfolded with a swift, cleansing clarity. The legal machinery consumed my parents entirely. Tyler faced an arraignment hearing that drained Gary of his liquid retirement assets. They hired a high-priced defense team to negotiate a plea deal, funneling their wealth into the black hole of his criminal defense. The social media campaign Tyler orchestrated vanished overnight. The defamatory posts were deleted. The digital mob dissolved.
My phone began to buzz with a different kind of notification. The extended relatives who sent me venomous texts on Monday morning suddenly attempted to send clumsy backtracking apologies. Cousins claimed they were misled. Aunts pretended they always suspected Tyler harbored dark secrets. I did not reply to a single message. I deleted the texts and blocked their numbers. On the second Friday after the arrest, my father left a voicemail on my secure line. His tone was broken, stripped of all arrogance. He begged me to submit a character reference to the district attorney, hoping a statement of leniency from the victim would reduce the sentencing guidelines for his boy. He pleaded with me to remember our shared blood. I listened to the recording once, standing in my kitchen, watching the city lights flicker to life. Then I deleted the voicemail. I opened my carrier settings and initiated a total communication block on both of my parents. I severed the digital ties, the physical access, and the emotional tethers. I went full no contact, constructing an impermeable wall between my future and their endless enabling cycle. I refused to be dragged back into the current. I refused to subsidize their denial with my peace of mind. Aunt Denise became my solitary anchor to the family tree. We met for dinner at a quiet seafood restaurant overlooking the Willamette River. She wore a sharp ivory blazer and ordered a bottle of crisp Pinot Gris. She raised her glass, the crystal catching the ambient light of the dining room. I handled the extended network, Denise informed me, taking a slow sip of her wine. I told your uncles and your cousins that if they ever speak your name with anything less than profound respect, they will have to deal with my real estate attorneys. The whispers have stopped, Acacia. You excised the toxicity. You protected your empire. I clinked my glass against hers. The wine tasted bright and clean. I realized I was smiling, a genuine, unburdened expression that reached my eyes. For the first time in 32 years, I did not feel the crushing weight of parental expectation pressing down on my chest. I did not feel the need to shrink my ambition to make my brother look taller. Months have passed since that rainy Wednesday in the boardroom. Today, the Eco Freight Solutions headquarters hums with vibrant, unobstructed kinetic energy. I walk across the polished concrete floors of the bullpen, breathing in the scent of the living moss walls and fresh organic coffee. The routing dispatchers negotiate new ethical transport corridors. The compliance officers verify our carbon offset metrics with flawless precision. We just signed 2 major sustainable farming cooperatives, expanding our fleet capacity by 20%. The business is thriving because the foundation is finally secure. The parasite is gone. My name is Acacia Smith. I built a green logistics empire from a rented garage, and I learned the most difficult lesson a daughter can learn. Blood does not entitle anyone to your sanctuary. Family loyalty is a beautiful concept, but when it is weaponized to excuse betrayal, it becomes a poison. You cannot heal a dynamic that relies on your subjugation. If you are sitting in a room right now, listening to a relative demand your resources, your energy, or your peace to fix a crisis they created, you hold the power to stand up and lock the door. You do not need to absorb their friction. You do not need to finance their fresh start. You owe your greatest loyalty to the life you survived the darkest nights to build. Enforcing a boundary will feel like a betrayal to the people who benefit from your lack of one. Let them feel betrayed. Let them call you a ruthless, soulless suit. The peace that settles into your bones when you finally stop subsidizing their dysfunction is worth every single insult they hurl your way. Thank you for listening to my story on Mourning Revenge. If you have ever had to cut a toxic branch off your family tree to save yourself, drop a leaf emoji in the comments. I read every single one. Subscribe to the channel if you believe accountability is the highest form of justice. Until next time, guard your empire, trust your instincts, and never apologize for protecting your peace. The rain-slicked windows of a Portland loft may seem like a highly specific, isolated setting, but the fracture that occurred inside Acacia's cold executive boardroom is a mirror reflecting a quiet, devastating crisis echoing across American living rooms. We are raised on an idealized cinematic vision of the traditional family, a sanctuary of unconditional love, a safety net that catches us when a ruthless world pushes us off the edge. But what happens when the net itself is woven from deceit? What happens when unconditional love mutates into a toxic demand for unconditional tolerance of abuse? The story of Tyler's brazen embezzlement and his parents' blind, suffocating enabling is not merely a tale of corporate revenge. It is a profound spiritual and social diagnostic of how we raise our children, how we define loyalty, and how we must ultimately cultivate our own souls to survive the people who claim to love us most. For parents navigating the complex landscape of modern American culture, this narrative serves as a harrowing cautionary tale about the true meaning of family responsibility. We often confuse the desperate desire to protect our children with the act of paralyzing them. Gary and Susan believed they were loving their son by cushioning his falls, subsidizing his failures, and buying his way out of consequences. But true parenting, rooted in the deep traditional values of honesty, fairness, and long-term guidance, requires the agonizing courage to let your child fail. When we shield our children from the natural consequences of their actions, we do not build their confidence, we systematically dismantle their character. We rob them of the inner fortitude necessary to navigate a society that will not care about their fragile egos. The golden child syndrome is rarely a symptom of excess love. Rather, it is a symptom of parental ego and emotional cowardice. It is a refusal to face one's own failures and discipline, choosing instead to force the responsible child to subsidize the reckless one. Furthermore, to raise a child with genuine emotional awareness within a traditional family structure, parents must enforce the boundaries of fairness. Emotional awareness does not mean validating every twisted feeling or excusing malicious behavior because a child is struggling. It means possessing the clarity to recognize when a child is using emotional manipulation as a weapon. Gary and Susan lacked this awareness, allowing their son's fabricated victimhood to blind them to his undeniable cruelty. Love without strict accountability is simply a slow-acting poison, sweet to the taste, but ultimately fatal to a child's spirit. For the young adults and professionals striving to build their own honorable lives, Acacia's Journey offers a masterclass in self-preservation and ethical fortitude. Society constantly conditions us to believe that blood is an inescapable lifelong debt. We are taught to absorb the friction to keep the peace at holiday dinners and to sacrifice our own mental health on the altar of familial duty. But Acacia's realization in that chilled boardroom offers the ultimate emancipation. Blood does not entitle anyone to your sanctuary. Building a successful ethical life requires the wisdom to see reality exactly as it is, stripped of emotional blackmail. You are not required to set yourself on fire simply to keep your family warm. Establishing firm, impenetrable boundaries is not an act of cruelty. It is the highest form of self-respect. Your integrity, your ethical code, and your peace of mind are the true currency of your existence. Do not let unwarranted guilt bankrupt you. Viewed through the ancient lens of a spiritual cultivator, one who walks the path of Tu Dao, seeking to refine the mind and spirit, this story exposes a deep, pervasive societal sickness. We live in a modern era where material entitlement frequently masquerades as victimhood and where the human ego constantly seeks external validation rather than demanding internal correction. The path of true cultivation requires us to look inward and rigorously correct our own flaws. Tu Suo Chin Ming. It demands that we develop Tri Tui, wisdom, to pierce through the fog of societal illusions and manipulative lies. It requires Dao Duk, morality, that is unbending and pure, refusing to participate in fraud, even when faced with the agonizing pressure of the people we hold dearest. Finally, it demands Neat Look, resilience, the sheer spiritual grit to withstand the pain of severing toxic attachments. Tyler's ultimate tragedy was not merely that he was a thief, it was that he completely lacked the willingness to look in the mirror. He lived in a perpetual state of externalizing blame, running terrified from the spiritual labor required to become a whole functioning human being. Acacia, conversely, walked the painful, isolating path of the cultivator. She endured the lonely agony of the silent audit, mastering her own impulses, suppressing her reactive anger, and acting with surgical, detached precision. She aligned herself entirely with the truth, and the truth, while devastating to her family structure, ultimately set her free. To achieve a better, more peaceful life, we must engage in this daily practice of self-correction. We must build our wisdom to see the trap, our morality, to refuse the bait, and our resilience to walk away from the toxicity, even if it means walking entirely alone. This narrative fundamentally challenges everything we are taught about the sanctity of the family unit. We are relentlessly conditioned to believe that abandoning family is the ultimate moral failure, a sin against our very nature. But here is a decisive counter-conventional truth. Sometimes staying is the true moral failure. When a family structure requires your subjugation, your silence, and your complicity in ethical decay, simply to maintain its artificial peace, that structure is no longer a family. It is a cult of enabling. Walking away, letting the bridge burn to ash, and handing over the evidence is not a destruction of family values. It is the absolute defense of them. It is declaring with unshakable conviction that honesty, justice, and spiritual integrity hold a higher, more sacred authority than shared DNA. If this reflection resonates with the quiet, unspoken battles you are fighting in your own life, I encourage you to join our growing community. Subscribe and follow Morning Revenge for more stories that strip away the polite fiction of society and expose the raw, unvarnished truth of human dynamics. We share these narratives because we believe that accountability is not a punishment. It is the highest, purest form of justice. As you reflect on the cold, echoing silence of Acacia's boardroom, ask yourself about the rooms you currently occupy. We all carry a ledger, a quiet, internal accounting of the compromises we make to keep the people we love comfortable in their dysfunction. But when the final audit of your life is conducted, what will your ledger reveal? Will it show that you loved your family enough to endure the pain of their truth? Or will it show that you simply feared their anger too much to demand their honesty? The door is unlocked. The security badge is resting in your palm. Are you going to stay seated at the table, or are you finally ready to walk out into the rain?